The quantum cascade began not with a roar, but with a whisper, a microscopic fluctuation in the fundamental fabric of space-time that most would have dismissed as a mere statistical anomaly. But for the Zorn Collective, it was the beginning of the end. Admiral Krelax stood motionless in the central command chamber of the resonance spire, his six-fingered hands clenched behind his back, 6 eyes, 3 pairs stacked vertically, fixed on the holographic displays that chronicled their civilization's rapid unraveling. The spire itself was a marvel of Zorn engineering, a kilometers-high structure of crystalline biotech that pulsed with the collective knowledge of their entire species. Now it trembled almost imperceptibly, like a living thing sensing its own mortality. "Quantum drift is accelerating," reported Nextal, the youngest senior researcher ever assigned to the crisis response team. Her voice carried a tremor that she desperately tried to suppress. The holographic displays around her flickered with cascading data, star systems winking out of existence, entire planetary networks collapsing into quantum foam, the very building blocks of matter beginning to disintegrate. The Zorn had always prided themselves on their technological supremacy. For millennia, they had been the most advanced civilization in this sector of the galaxy, their quantum computing technologies so sophisticated that they could predict and manipulate probability fields with unprecedented precision. But this was something entirely different. The quantum cascade was not just a threat. It was a fundamental breakdown of the physical laws that held their reality together. 73.6 standard planetary cycles remaining. Another researcher announced, his voice breaking. The number meant more than just time. It represented the estimated lifespan of their entire civilization, a countdown to absolute extinction. Admiral Krelax turned, his exoskeleton shifting with a sound like crystalline wind chimes. The command chamber was a study in controlled panic, hundreds of researchers and military personnel working with a desperate efficiency that masked their growing terror. Holographic displays showed multiple star systems already consumed by the cascade, their matter breaking down into fundamental particles that no longer followed any known physical laws. "Prepare the grand transmission," Krelax commanded, his translator implant converting his native clicking chirp language into a dozen galactic standard communication protocols simultaneously. Nextal looked up, her secondary visual receptors dilating in surprise. The grand transmission was more than just a distress call. It was a last desperate attempt to reach any civilization that might, just might, have a solution to their impending doom. The quantum cascade was unlike anything previously encountered. It wasn't a conventional threat like war, environmental collapse, or stellar event. This was a fundamental unraveling of the universe itself, starting from the Zorn's home systems and spreading with an inexorable mathematical precision that defied traditional understanding of physics. "Transmission parameters?" Nextal asked, her fingers dancing across quantum-reactive holographic interfaces. "Maximum breadth," Krelax responded. "Encrypt using all known communication matrices. Include full spectral analysis, quantum signature records, and complete historical context. We leave nothing to chance." Around them, the resonance spire continued to pulse, a living monument to a civilization that was quite literally coming apart at the seams. Each pulse of light represented billions of lives, centuries of cultural achievement, an entire species' hopes and dreams. Nextal's hands moved with a precision born of desperation. The transmission would be sent across multiple communication spectra, quantum entanglement channels, hyperluminal burst transmitters, even archic radio wave frequencies. Anything to increase their chances of being understood. As the final compilation of their civilization's last hope began to take shape, Admiral Krelax allowed himself a moment of reflection. They were not asking for rescue. They were offering their entire accumulated knowledge as a final testament, a message in a cosmic bottle, hoping that someone, anyone, might learn from their imminent destruction. "Transmission ready," Nextal announced. Krelax nodded. "Send it." And with that, the desperate plea of the Zorn Collective burst forth into the galaxy, a last defiant cry against the darkness that was consuming them. The United Earth Crisis Response Center wasn't what anyone would expect from humanity's most advanced problem-solving facility. Located in what used to be an abandoned art complex in Sao Paulo, the center looked more like a controlled explosion of human creativity than a traditional research facility. Dr. Lyra Rodriguez stood at the center of organized chaos, her cybernetic arm, a marvel of biomechanical engineering that looked more like a living sculpture than a prosthetic, constantly shifting and recalibrating. Around her, a team that defied every conventional approach to scientific research worked with an intensity that bordered on manic inspiration. "We've received the full transmission," announced Marcus Chen, the lead quantum systems engineer who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His workspace was a nightmare of holographic displays, hand-drawn mathematical equations, and what appeared to be abstract musical scores intertwined with quantum mechanics diagrams. Dr. Rodriguez's eyes, one natural, one a complex augmented lens that could perceive realities beyond standard human perception, scanned the incoming Zorn transmission. Where most would see an incomprehensible threat, she saw a puzzle waiting to be reimagined. "It's not a problem to be solved," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "It's a conversation we haven't learned to have yet." The team around her was anything but a traditional scientific research group. To her left, Dr. Akira Tanaka, a quantum physicist with a background in interpretive dance, was literally moving her body, translating the mathematical patterns of the Zorn transmission into a physical language. Her movements were precise, each gesture a complex equation made flesh. Next to Tanaka, Elena Cortez, a composer and chaos theory expert, was transcribing the quantum data into what could only be described as a living musical score. Her fingers danced across quantum reactive interfaces, turning mathematical principles into a symphony of potential solutions. "We can't approach this linearly," Rodriguez explained to the team. The Zorn's transmission was a death knell, a cry for help that contained the entire mathematical signature of their civilization's impending collapse. But humanity didn't do linear solutions. Humanity reimagined problems. Marcus Chen brought up a holographic display that looked more like a Jackson Pollock painting than a scientific analysis. "Traditional intervention would be suicide," he said. "They're looking at a quantum cascade that's rewriting the fundamental laws of physics. You can't patch that. You have to dance with it." The team worked in a state of controlled frenzy. Traditional scientific methodology went out the window. Instead, they approached the problem like artists confronting a blank canvas, like musicians improvising a complex jazz composition, like dancers interpreting an impossible choreography. Dr. Rodriguez's cybernetic arm began to pulse, its surface displaying complex mathematical patterns that seemed to breathe and shift. "We're not going to save them," she said suddenly. "We're going to show them how to save themselves." The response they were crafting was nothing short of revolutionary. It wasn't a solution in any traditional sense. It was a method of perception, a way of understanding that transformed the very nature of the problem itself. Hours turned into days. The team worked in shifts that made no logical sense, their creativity flowing like a living current. They incorporated disciplines that most scientific approaches would never consider. Quantum mechanics merged with musical theory, genetic engineering intertwined with abstract art, computational logic dancing with philosophical thought. "Ready for transmission," Marcus Chen announced near the end of their marathon session. The message they had crafted looked like pure chaos to any conventional observer. It was a transmission that contained multiple layers of information, genetic restructuring protocols hidden within musical compositions, quantum stabilization matrices encoded in what appeared to be abstract visual art. Dr. Rodriguez looked at the final compilation and smiled. It was beautiful. It was impossible. It was quintessentially human. "Send it," she commanded. And with that, humanity's response burst forth, a transmission that was less a message and more a complete reimagining of the very concept of communication, problem-solving, and existence itself. The Zorn Collective's primary research station, the nexus of comprehension, had never encountered a communication so fundamentally incomprehensible. What should have been a straightforward cryptographic challenge had become an existential crisis of scientific understanding. Nextall sat at the center of a massive holographic array, her multiple neural interfaces smoking slightly from the intense cognitive load. Around her, the most brilliant Zorn minds worked in a state of controlled desperation. The human transmission defied every known principle of communication, science, and rational thought. "It's alive," she muttered, causing several senior researchers to turn in confusion. Dr. Vorlax, the chief cryptanalyst, approached her workstation. His exoskeleton clicked with agitation. "Explain." Nextall's hands danced across quantum reactive interfaces, pulling apart the human transmission layer by layer. What emerged was nothing short of miraculous. The message was not a static communication, but a dynamic, self-modifying system that seemed to respond and change with each attempt at analysis. The first layer appeared to be a musical composition, but not in any traditional sense. Each note, each harmonic progression, carried embedded quantum mechanical information. It was as if the very structure of sound had been transformed into a complex mathematical language. "Look," Nextall said, zooming into a particular section of the transmission. "The musical frequencies are actually encoding genetic restructuring protocols. But it's not just encoding. It's a living algorithm that adapts and rewrites itself with each observation." Senior researchers gathered around, their multiple eyes struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. The transmission was simultaneously a genetic restructuring protocol, a quantum stabilization matrix, an interdimensional musical composition, a complex adaptive system that changed its own parameters. Dr. Vorlax's translator implant struggled to process the implications. This wasn't just a message. It was a living solution that fundamentally challenged everything the Zorn understood about communication, science, and problem-solving. "How is this possible?" one researcher asked, her voice a mixture of terror and awe. Nextall continued her analysis. The genetic sequences embedded in the transmission were not just information. They were a complete reimagining of molecular stability. Where the Zorn's science saw matter as something to be controlled, the human transmission treated matter as a dynamic, responsive entity. The quantum stabilization matrix was equally mind-bending. It wasn't a static solution, but a dynamic process that seemed to dance with the very quantum cascade threatening to destroy the Zorn civilization. Instead of trying to stop the cascade, the human transmission suggested a method of transformation, of turning destruction into a form of cosmic renewal. "It's like they're not trying to solve our problem," Nextall explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're trying to help us see the problem differently." As hours turned into days, the research team became increasingly obsessed. This was more than a scientific breakthrough. It was a fundamental reimagining of existence itself. The human transmission suggested that the quantum cascade wasn't a threat to be stopped, but a process to be understood and guided. Dr. Vorlax watched as Nextall worked, her young mind adapting to the impossible communication in ways that even the most senior researchers could not. She was literally rewriting the Zorn's understanding of science with each passing moment. "We're not dealing with a message," Vorlax finally concluded. "We're dealing with a living concept of problem-solving." Just as the team began to feel they were making progress, the transmission would shift, revealing new layers of complexity, new ways of understanding. It was less a communication and more a living, breathing entity of pure possibility. Nextall collapsed near the end of her 72-hour analysis session, her neural interfaces overloaded. But before she lost consciousness, she managed to whisper something that would echo through the Zorn collective. "They didn't send us a solution. They sent us a way of seeing." The impossible decryption continued, with the Zorn researchers standing at the precipice of a complete transformation of their scientific understanding. Tension crackled through the Zorn collective's central command like an electrical storm, as the quantum cascade continued to devour star systems at an exponential rate. Military leaders and scientific advisors found themselves at a critical impasse. Admiral Krelak stood at the center of a holographic battlefield, watching entire planetary networks collapse into quantum foam. His 6 eyes tracked the cascading destruction, each pair processing different layers of the unfolding catastrophe. To his left, military commanders demanded immediate, aggressive intervention. To his right, scientific advisors argued for a more measured approach. And then there were the humans. Dr. Lyra Rodriguez moved through the command center like she owned it, her cybernetic arm casting complex holographic patterns that seemed to dance between mathematical precision and abstract art. Marcus Chen followed, his equipment a bizarre amalgamation of scientific instruments and what appeared to be musical technology. "You're doing nothing." Commander Zelmak, the most decorated military strategist in the Zorn Collective, slammed his crystalline fist against a quantum-reactive interface. The hologram flickered but didn't break, a testament to the Zorn's advanced technology. Dr. Rodriguez didn't even look up. "We're doing everything," she responded, her voice calm and measured. The human intervention was nothing like what the Zorn expected, where they anticipated conventional rescue protocols, shield generators, quantum stabilization fields, emergency evacuation procedures. The humans were performing what could only be described as a cosmic ballet. Dr. Akira Tanaka moved between quantum monitoring stations, her body tracing complex mathematical equations in physical space. Each step she took seemed to reshape the very fabric of the quantum cascade. Elena Cortez stood at a massive interface, her fingers dancing across holographic controls that generated sound waves capable of restructuring molecular bonds. "This is madness." Zelmak drew his primary weapon, a quantum disruptor capable of vaporizing entire planetary defense systems. The weapon hummed with potential energy, pointed directly at Dr. Rodriguez. Nextal, the young Zorn researcher who had first begun to understand the human transmission, stepped forward. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. The entire command center froze. "Look," she said, bringing up a holographic display that showed the quantum cascade from a perspective no Zorn scientist had ever considered. The destruction wasn't random. It wasn't even destructive in the traditional sense. It was a transformation, a cosmic rebirth happening at the quantum level. Marcus Chen's device, part scientific instrument, part musical device, began to pulse. The sound it generated was beyond music, beyond language. It was a direct translation of the quantum instabilities, rendered as a complex, adaptive symphony that seemed to reshape the very fabric of reality. "We're not fighting the cascade," Dr. Rodriguez explained, her cybernetic arm now fully extended, displaying a living, breathing mathematical model that seemed to breathe and pulse with its own intelligence. "We're learning its language." Commander Zelmak's weapon hand trembled. Decades of military training, centuries of scientific understanding, were being challenged by an approach that defied every principle of conventional intervention. 62.4 standard planetary cycles remaining, a research assistant announced, her voice breaking. The quantum cascade continued its relentless consumption. Star systems winked out of existence. Entire civilizational networks collapsed. And yet, the human team remained impossibly calm. Elena Cortez began to overlay mathematical patterns onto the cascading destruction, creating a multi-dimensional representation that was simultaneously a scientific analysis and a work of pure artistic expression. "This is our last chance," Admiral Krelak said softly, his translator implant converting his native language into a desperate plea. "Either stop this or—" Dr. Rodriguez turned, her augmented eye focusing on the Admiral with a gaze that seemed to look through reality itself. "Or what?" she asked. "Or you'll die. You're already dying. We're offering you a way to be reborn." The command center held its collective breath. Commander Zelmak's weapon remained raised. The quantum cascade continued its cosmic dance of destruction and potential. And humanity's intervention reached its most critical moment. The breakthrough arrived not with a thunderous revelation, but with a whisper, a quantum-level shift so subtle that most scientific instruments would have missed it entirely. Dr. Akira Tanaka was the first to notice. Her body, which had been tracing complex mathematical equations through physical movement, suddenly went completely still. To the Zorn observers, it looked like a moment of perfect suspension, as if she had become a living statue of scientific possibility. "Now," she said simply. Marcus Chen's hybrid instrument, a device that defied classification as either scientific equipment or musical apparatus, began to pulse. The sound it generated was beyond human comprehension, beyond even the most advanced Zorn translation matrices. It was a direct translation of quantum potential, a symphony of molecular reconfiguration that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. Nextall, who had been observing every moment of the human intervention, realized something profound was happening. The quantum cascade wasn't being stopped. It was being transformed. Dr. Lyra Rodriguez moved with a precision that seemed to defy physical law. Her cybernetic arm extended, not as a mechanical appendage, but as a living interface between possibility and reality. Holographic representations exploded around her, not static images, but dynamic, breathing systems that responded to her slightest movement. "Your civilization is not dying," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension of the command center. "It's being reborn." Elena Cortez began to overlay mathematical patterns onto the cascading destruction. Where the Zorn saw annihilation, she saw a complex dance of molecular potential. Her fingers moved across quantum reactive interfaces, turning the very concept of destruction into a living, adaptive system. The first signs of transformation were almost imperceptible. A quantum fluctuation here, a molecular restructuring there. But to those who knew how to look, to those who could see beyond traditional scientific understanding, something miraculous was happening. Commander Zelnak's weapon hand trembled. Decades of military training, centuries of scientific understanding, were being challenged by an approach that defied every principle of conventional intervention. "We're not solving your problem," Marcus Chen explained, his voice a complex harmonic that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of reality. "We're having a conversation with it." The quantum cascade began to change. It was no longer a force of destruction, but a process of cosmic renewal. Star systems that moments ago were collapsing into quantum foam began to stabilize, not through force, but through a fundamental reimagining of their molecular structure. Nextall watched in awe as entire planetary networks began to reconstruct themselves. But this wasn't repair in any traditional sense. It was transformation. The molecular structures were not being restored to their previous state, but reimagined into something entirely new. Dr. Rodriguez's cybernetic eye flickered with patterns that looked like living mathematics. "Existence is not about preservation," she said softly. "It's about adaptation." The human team worked in a state of synchronicity that defied traditional understanding of teamwork. Dr. Tanaka's physical movements, Chen's sonic interventions, Cortez's mathematical overlays, Rodriguez's quantum interfacing. They were not separate actions, but a single, complex adaptive system. Admiral Krelax realized they were witnessing something beyond rescue. This was a fundamental reimagining of what was possible. The quantum cascade continued, but now it was a process of creation rather than destruction. Molecular structures that had been collapsing began to reconstruct themselves in patterns of incredible complexity. It was less a scientific intervention and more a cosmic performance art piece. 47.2 standard planetary cycles remaining, a research assistant announced. But the number now meant something entirely different. It was no longer a countdown to extinction, but a window of transformation. Nextall understood first. The humans hadn't come to save the Zorn civilization. They had come to help it evolve. And the evolution was just beginning. The final stage of the intervention was nothing short of a cosmic metamorphosis. What had begun as a desperate plea for survival transformed into a fundamental reimagining of existence itself. Dr. Lyra Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of the transformation, her cybernetic arm now fully integrated with the quantum fabric surrounding her. The command center had long since ceased to be a traditional space. It was now a living, breathing interface between possibility and reality. Nextall watched in absolute wonder as entire star systems began to reconstruct themselves. But this was not restoration. It was evolution. Molecular structures rearranged themselves in patterns that defied every known principle of physics, creating something entirely new. "We're not saving you," Dr. Rodriguez had said earlier. "We're helping you become." The human team worked with a synchronicity that seemed to transcend individual action. Dr. Akira Tanaka moved like a quantum dancer, her body tracing complex mathematical equations that reshaped reality with each movement. Marcus Chen's sonic interventions, part scientific instrument, part musical composition, translated the language of molecular restructuring into a symphony of cosmic potential. Elena Cortez stood at the heart of a holographic matrix, her fingers weaving mathematical patterns that looked like living art. Each gesture was a complex algorithm, each movement a profound scientific intervention. Admiral Krelax and the Zorn leadership could only watch in stunned silence. Commander Zelnak's weapon, once raised in anger, now hung limply at his side, a relic of an understanding that no longer applied. The quantum cascade, once a force of total destruction, had become a process of cosmic renewal. Star systems that moments ago were dissolving into quantum foam now pulsed with new potential. Planetary networks reconstructed themselves not as they were, but as they could be. "It's alive," Nextall whispered, her neural interfaces struggling to comprehend the transformation happening before her eyes. The intervention was simultaneously a scientific process and a work of art. Molecular structures danced and reconfigured, creating patterns of incredible complexity. It was as if the very fabric of reality was learning, adapting, becoming something entirely new. Dr. Rodriguez's cybernetic eye flickered with patterns of pure possibility. "Existence is a conversation," she said, her voice resonating through multiple quantum frequencies. "Not a fixed state." The human team moved as a single, complex adaptive system. Their intervention was not about controlling the quantum cascade, but about understanding it, about entering into a dialogue with the fundamental forces of creation and destruction. Entire civilizational networks that had been moments away from total collapse now thrummed with new potential. The transformation was not just physical but conceptual. The Zorn were witnessing a complete reimagining of what was possible. Marcus Chen's hybrid instrument reached a crescendo, a sound that was simultaneously a scientific analysis and a profound musical composition. The sound itself seemed to reshape reality, translating the complex language of quantum restructuring into a symphony of cosmic potential. 23.6 standard planetary cycles remaining, a research assistant announced. But the number was now meaningless. Time itself seemed to have become fluid, adaptive. Admiral Krelax realized they were experiencing something beyond rescue. This was a birth, a cosmic rebirth that defied every principle of traditional understanding. Dr. Tanaka's movements reached their final, most complex configuration. Her body traced a final, intricate equation, a living mathematical formula that seemed to contain the entire potential of a civilization's transformation. And then, for a moment, everything stopped. The quantum cascade paused, not destroyed, but transformed. The human team stood at the center of a cosmic mandala of possibility, having turned a force of total destruction into a process of unimaginable creation. Nextall understood then what the humans had known all along. They hadn't come to save the Zorn. They had come to help them become something entirely new. The transformation was complete, but in many ways, it was just beginning. The aftermath defied every conventional understanding of rescue, intervention, or scientific achievement. In the weeks following the transformation, the Zorn Collective discovered they were no longer the civilization they had been. Their star systems, once on the brink of total destruction, now pulsed with a vitality that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. Molecular structures carried memories of near extinction, while simultaneously embodying unprecedented potential. Nextall found herself at the center of a profound scientific and philosophical revolution. Her research team worked in spaces that blurred the lines between scientific laboratory and artistic studio. The quantum restructuring had not just saved the Zorn, it had fundamentally reimagined what it meant to exist. Dr. Lyra Rodriguez stood before the Galactic Diplomatic Consortium, her cybernetic arm casting complex holographic patterns that seemed to tell a story more complex than any verbal explanation could convey. "We didn't rescue them," she explained to the assembled representatives from hundreds of civilizations. "We entered into a conversation with their fundamental potential." The human intervention team had become something more than traditional scientists or diplomats. Dr. Akira Tanaka moved between research stations, her body still tracing complex mathematical equations through physical movement. Marcus Chen continued to use his hybrid sonic scientific instruments, creating interventions that were equal parts technological innovation and pure artistic expression. Admiral Krelax, once a military leader focused on preservation and defense, now led a transformation council that reimagined every aspect of Zorn civilization. The military structures dissolved, replaced by adaptive networks that responded to potential rather than threat. "We were dying," Krelax would later record in the first comprehensive account of the intervention, "and humanity showed us that death is just another form of transformation." The changes were profound and multifaceted. Zorn technology began to adopt an approach that was simultaneously more organic and more precise. Their computational systems now responded like living organisms, capable of adaptive learning that made their previous quantum computing look like primitive calculation. Commander Zelnak, who had once raised a weapon against the human intervention team, now led diplomatic missions exploring the philosophical implications of their transformation. The military mindset of defense had been replaced by an approach of continuous adaptation and potential. Galactic observers watched in stunned fascination. What the humans had done defied every principle of traditional intervention. They hadn't conquered. They hadn't rescued. They had engaged in a profound conversation with the fundamental potential of an entire civilization. Dr. Elena Cortez continued to develop mathematical models that were as much works of art as scientific theories. Her research became the foundation of a new understanding of existence, one that saw reality as a dynamic, adaptive system rather than a fixed state. The quantum cascade that had threatened total extinction became a pivotal moment in Zorn history. Museums were created not to memorialize near destruction, but to celebrate the moment of transformation. Interactive exhibits allowed visitors to experience the intervention from multiple perspectives: scientific, artistic, philosophical. "We were a civilization of control," Nextall would later write in her groundbreaking text, Conversations of Potential. "Humanity showed us the power of conversation." The human intervention team became legendary, not as heroes, but as catalysts. They had arrived not to save, but to help the Zorn understand their own potential. Their approach was so fundamentally different from traditional rescue that it challenged every existing model of scientific and diplomatic intervention. Diplomatic missions between humans and Zorn became less about exchange and more about mutual exploration. They weren't sharing information, they were engaging in complex, multi-layered conversations about the nature of existence itself. The galaxy watched and wondered. What other conversations were possible? What other potentials remained unexplored? Dr. Rodriguez's final statement to the Galactic Diplomatic Consortium echoed across multiple communication spectra. Existence is not about survival. It's about continuous transformation. Some would call it science. Others would call it magic. The Zorn would simply call it a conversation, a profound ongoing dialogue with the very fabric of possibility. And humanity had once again proven that their most remarkable trait was not technological superiority, but the ability to reimagine what was possible.